This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
It is the lowest place on the face of the earth. The sea is so salt, nothing can live in it. Yet, in small settlements along the west bank of this Dead Sea, Jewish scholars once sought refuge from the moral decay of their time. The refuge ended shortly after the time of Christ. Roman conquerors were tightening their stranglehold on the Holy Land. Even the suggestion of dissension was intolerable. So, the emperor's legions crushed the desert settlements of the rabbis. A Jewish sect called the Essene apparently knew the end was coming. For generations, they had collected the wisdom of their people and the earliest known versions of the Old Testament. These treasures they hid in the caves that only they knew existed in the mountains behind their settlement. 19 centuries later, the treasure would be rediscovered. It would be a vindication of the faith of millions, evidence of the Bible as a factual history of the birth and heritage of mankind. No other city has inspired such passions. Jerusalem. Her ancient walls have seen so much. Pilgrims coming from all over the world, Jews mourning past outrages in prayers before stones quarried 2,000 years ago for Herod. Muslims visiting the site of Muhammad's ascension on a hill remembered by Jews for Abraham's sacrifice. Winding past sacred monuments are streets filled with mystery. The passers-by are a polyglot of creeds and cultures. For the moment, they coexist. Yet Jerusalem is a city wearied by war. Visitors are drawn to the nearby town of Bethlehem. There, commercial banners proclaim the birthplace of the Prince of Peace. From that time to this, Bethlehem has been a trading place for nomads from Judea. In 1947, one of these nomads found his way to a small shop, hoping to sell a rotting parchment he'd found in the desert. The desert beyond Bethlehem is Judea. Green things are rare in the land of the prophets, but a spring emerges from the mountains at a place called Ein Feshka. For as long as history has been recorded here, fresh water has flowed, nourishing vegetation and refreshing wayfarers. In recent times, Ein Feshka was Arab territory, part of the Kingdom of Jordan. In the Six-Day War, Israel pushed Jordan out of Jerusalem, out of Bethlehem, and out of Judea. Now, the Israelis hold the entire west bank of the Jordan River and Dead Sea. Israel's 1967 blitzkrieg was intended to push Arab forces back to the east bank of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, thus giving the tiny Jewish state a defensible border with its hostile neighbors. The West Bank is hostile enough without the thunder of competing armies. It is hot and dry and mountainous. The greenery and cool breezes of Jerusalem are only a short drive away, but they might as well be on the other side of the moon. Nowhere is the harsh reality of life on the West Bank more apparent than at an ancient mountain sanctuary 30 miles south of the spring at Ein Feshka. Today, cable cars make the journey to the top an easy one. In the time of Rome's dominion over the Hebrews, the trip meant climbing a trail called the Snake. By whatever route to the top, one encounters an astonishing monument to the human struggle for freedom. The place is Masada. 2,000 years ago, a people called the Zealots lived here. They looked at the corrupt world below and felt safe. Masada was the largest of the West Bank settlements maintained by religious patriots in defiance of Roman authority. On their mountaintop, the zealots even had room to grow livestock and crops. From their lookouts, they could see the other side of the Dead Sea and watch invasion routes from the north. An elaborate complex of reservoirs was cut into the mountain to store runoff from rare winter rains, enough to quench Masada's thirst all summer. No enemy could approach the walls of the city without being seen. The zealots were prepared for just about everything. But they had not anticipated the tenacity of the Roman legion. The army was marching south from Jerusalem. Rome was expanding the frontiers of empire. The legionnaires brought engines of war. They were prepared for a long siege. From the summit of Masada, it is still possible to see the outlines of the Roman encampments below. The battle raged 3 years. By then, the zealots knew the end was near. They drew lots to implement a desperate plan. The zealots had chosen death by their own hands rather than surrender. The man chosen by lot to see the deed done had fallen on his own sword. The zealots might have been hardened in their resolve by news of what had happened at Qumran. Like Masada, Qumran was a community of devout Jews who sought refuge from oppression and immorality. Their settlement lay in the Romans' line of march from Jerusalem to Masada. Qumran was much smaller, with none of Masada's formidable defenses. Its people were more disposed to prayer than politics or war. The Romans crushed them and moved on. For perhaps 200 years, the Qumran sect had struggled for survival in the desert. They had dug a canal to carry rainwater from reservoirs in the mountains. The canal led to an elaborate system of channels inside the settlement. These, in turn, fed a network of smaller channels which emptied into large and small cisterns. Use of the precious fluid, both for ceremony and survival, was decided in council debate. Debates took place in a large hall. Only full initiates could speak. Ritual cleansing in special pools was part of an initiation process which might take several years. It was the only way to become a participant in community life. If the new member was favored, he might gain access to another part of the settlement. In a small room facing the sea, Qumran's most important work was done. Here, scribes bent over plaster benches, copying holy scriptures, their work illuminated by a window open to the sky. In another room, potters worked to prepare the jars which would hold the scrolls. Others tanned hides for parchment. Work came to an abrupt halt in the spring of 31 BC. The Roman historian Josephus marks this as the time of a terrible earthquake. Major damage, which might have been caused by that quake, is evident at Qumran. Did the community then scatter to the hills? Open graves at the walls of Qumran may be evidence of the heavy price exacted by nature. New construction on the site of cleared wreckage indicates the settlement slowly came back to life. The dedication of the community was not to be thwarted by a catastrophe of God's making. Perhaps the Qumran settlers felt their faith was being tested, When the final crisis came, the people of Qumran would be ready. The flocks of goats and sheep grazing on the hills between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea belonged to nomadic desert Arabs called Bedouin. They are a clannish people, hardened to life in the wilderness. Few outsiders ever get close to them. Since the 17th century, the Ta'amira tribe has eked out a living near the banks of the Dead Sea. The terrain is harsh, and tending the livestock is hard work. On a hot summer's day in 1947, a young Ta'amira goat herd went chasing a stray. His name was Muhammad Adib, and he was about to make history. 2,000 years before Muhammad, others had followed the same path into the wilderness. The young Bedouin, who couldn't read and knew nothing of history, was walking in the footsteps of scholars who had devoted their lives to preserving the past. The adventure Muhammad was embarked on would soon vindicate their labors. Cool blackness had caught the boy's eye. It was a cave. Playfully, Muhammad dropped a stone. He had found the hiding place of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
When the news of the discovery reached me in Jerusalem, I was a fellow of the American School of Oriental Research in the year 1947-48. On February 15th, a few days before,
Professor John Trevor was the first scholar to see Muhammad's discovery, as agents for the Bedouin quietly sought to determine its worth.
It was Wednesday, the 18th of February, when the Syrians called to the American school to get some information about some manuscripts that they had. I was amazed by their description. It didn't make too much sense to me. So I said, well, the only way I can give you information is to see the documents. So they agreed to come over the next afternoon. And when they arrived, they had a satchel with 5 documents wrapped in Arabic newspaper. They handed me one very small one, and I tried to open it, and it was very brittle. Before I had a chance to do more than simply notice it was in Hebrew, then they drew my attention to this large scroll. And when I began to look at what was before me, I was puzzled. And immediately when I began to compare this script with the Nash Papyrus, I saw evidences of great antiquity. The Nash Papyrus had been dated in the 2nd century, 1st century BC. And I thought to myself, well, perhaps then this could be as old as the Nash Papyrus, which would make it 1,000 years older than the oldest known biblical manuscript in Hebrew. But then I suddenly realized that I had not checked the manuscript for authenticity. Could it be a forgery, was the question that plagued me all that night. So the next morning I made arrangements to get into the old city and go to the monastery. And then they brought out the scroll again, and I began to unroll it very carefully, looking for evidences of corrections, particularly that might give an indication of authenticity. And I finally came to column 33, and there suddenly was the evidence that I was looking for. For here on this column are 2 corrections made by 2 different hands, and no forger could possibly have produced the phenomenon of those corrections. Then I knew that I was looking at a manuscript that was 2,000 years old, the oldest biblical manuscript yet discovered.
News of the discovery touched off a stampede. Jordanian authorities called on the famed desert police for help. The Bedouin weren't about to tell anyone where the cave was. It would be up to the police to find it before more scrolls got into the wrong hands, and bidding climbed too high for scholars to compete with private collectors. In time, the police succeeded. They found not one cave, but a virtual honeycomb in the hills behind Qumran. The Bedouin, however, had found them first. They were picked clean. No one could be sure how many of the caves had actually contained anything of value. Scroll hunting had become the full-time occupation of the Ta'amira tribe. Every likely crevice was explored. The Bedouin had approached the task with the same cunning that had made them successful smugglers and highwaymen. Clearly, the only choice authorities had was to deal with the Bedouin. Government archaeologist Joseph Saad checked into the Winter Palace Hotel in Jericho, posing as an agent for a wealthy collector. There, Saad met secretly with his superior to fix the price they were willing to pay. They settled on a maximum fee of £1 per square centimeter of scroll fragment. Negotiations were set to take place in a rundown hotel on the other side of town. Representing the Bedouin was a Bethlehem merchant named Kando. It was to him that Muhammad had brought the first scrolls. Eventually, the bargain was made. Although neither side really trusted the other, a relationship now existed that could enable scholars to unravel the mystery of the scrolls. Kando and his young Bedouin friend Muhammad even traveled to Amman, Jordan, to dine with the director of antiquities. There, for the first time, officials heard the full story of the amazing discovery. By now, experts had a much clearer understanding of the importance of the scrolls. Basically, the scrolls provide a 2,000-year-old verification of the accuracy of the Old Testament as known to modern men. The uniformity of the versions was astonishing. In 1952, another amazing discovery was made. 2 rolled strips of copper were found near Qumran. When cut apart, they revealed an inventory of buried treasure. The wealth represented in the list was enormous. Gold and silver bullion, huge quantities of coins and sacred artifacts. Could this be the treasure of Jerusalem, lost in the Roman attack of 70 AD? If it is, the Jews must have hidden the wealth in secret places throughout the city. What has become of the treasure? Why would the list be hidden at Qumran? The ruins are mute. Clearly, however, the settlement was recognized in its own day as far more important than the size of its membership would suggest. Some scholars believe John the Baptist lived here as a boy, watching the scribes work at their writing tables. Jesus was certainly at least aware of the community and of the scripture being copied and sealed away in the large clay jars unique to Qumran, time capsules to be opened in a distant age. From the other writings of the sect, we know that the community believed it was living in the last days before God's judgment, the ultimate triumph of light over darkness. Even as they labored to accumulate and preserve the Jewish scriptures, they prepared for the final struggle with the forces of evil and the new age to come. In this way, the Qumran settlers anticipated the apocalypse. When it came, they were unprepared for the result.
The Qumran community continued for over 200 years to live here in this site with that daily expectation that the new age was about to begin and they would be involved. But instead, exactly the opposite happened. Instead of there being the sons of light who would destroy or defeat the sons of darkness came down in the form of the Roman Vespasian army and defeated the sons of light.
The written contributions of Qumran live on in Jerusalem's shrine of the book. Qumran's spirit is alive too. Many of today's Jews are following the traditions established there so long ago. All who value faith are in some way indebted to the people who labored in the desert to preserve it. Qumran was destroyed and its inhabitants put to the sword. Perhaps, however, the ultimate victory they prayed for was theirs after all. We know that the Essenes sent emissaries to Masada when they saw the end was near for Qumran. Perhaps they sent them elsewhere. The map will give us a clue. The east bank of the Jordan and Dead Sea is in many ways a mirror image of the west. For Jerusalem, there's Amman. For Eilat, there is Aqaba. Why should the Essene and Zealots not have established settlements on the east bank also? The political boundaries of today meant nothing then. The east bank has been untouched by archaeologists. What treasures may lie in these hills? Qumran was created to rise above the corruption and violence of its age. Peace has not yet come to the west bank of the Dead Sea. If it ever does, perhaps men can concentrate on finding more of the treasures Qumran left behind.
Coming up next, In Search Of continues with a journey into the strange and secret world of the Coral Castle. Then, 20th Century with Mike Wallace reports on the pros and cons of United Nations peacekeeping and peace-building missions.